It's a delight to be here today with Mary Pope Osborne, who is an author. And I've met Mary simply by an absolutely incredible comment that she made on the video that was the discussion between DC Schindler and Jordan Hall. And I have been fascinated wanting to get to know her better after that comment. And so I asked her to join me. And today we're going to hear Mary's story. So, Mary, if you would just start by telling us about your background, how you grew up, how you decided to become a writer, and what led you to write the book that was discussed in the comment that you left on my channel a few months back.
Oh yeah. Well, that was real synchronicity, Karen. I was floating around looking at different videos that day, and I landed on yours. I'm a fan of DC Schindler, and I had just been introduced to Jordan Hall on another video. I'm not sure if it was yours, but it was one with John Vervaeke, and his testimony about how his faith was so beautiful that when I saw they were talking with you, I tuned in. And then Jordan mentioned something about a unicorn in a children's book that he'd seen in his house. And then the next day, his wife saw the same picture of the unicorn somewhere else. It all seemed very synchronistic, and which was the theme of the moment. And I realized through his description that he saw it in my book, and I have it here, Blizzard of the Blue Moon, where
Oh,
my characters of the Magic Treehouse rescue the unicorn from the tapestries at the cloister. And it has the picture that Jordan, I'm almost positive, saw in the children's book of the unicorn in captivity inside a little fenced area with a pomegranate tree above it. But that was so shocking that I rarely comment on any sites I see, but I did on yours because I thought it was so in keeping with the theme of the day of so we're all sort of participating in a greater reality in our own humble ways, and we intersect at points, and that seemed like a real intersection. And then when you responded to me, it seemed just meant to be. So it was so great. I was resistant at first because I think of your videos as having a lot of really intelligent scientists and academics and people who almost speak well, do speak in many cases a different language than I speak. But I think that what I bring to the table is childhood and the imagination. That's sort of my strength. And I started having a wonderful childhood. I was an army brat. Uh,
me
were
too.
you an army brat? I
Yes.
thought so. And I think we were stationed in, were you stationed in Austria as a child in the occupation?
No, we were in Germany. It,
Okay, we were in Salzburg, Austria,
uh-huh.
in the 50s. And then I lived very closely with my family because we moved every year almost for the
Yeah.
first 15 years of my life. And it bonded me with my brothers, my twin brother, my younger brother, my older sister, we're all best friends to this day. And what we did in all of our different environments was play and pretend and invent. And our lives were spent out of doors, and everything was something else. Like a picnic table was a ship, and a bicycle was a horse, and a banister in our house was another horse that I'd ride in the morning before first grade and put a blanket over it as a saddle, and really accept, sort of live on the periphery of reality with all the possibilities of Robert Louis Stevenson has a great quote that children live in the shadows, not in the substance. And I think I'm still living in the shadows, but I believe as a child that reality prepared me for a life of the imagination, and that evolved as I grew up, of course, but is still rich today. And my readers are people who've had no more than a third grade education for the most part. But before the fourth grade, there's so much magic and there's so much delicious sensibility of this almost intersects time with, you know, um, infinity, I guess, because they don't have enough to to order things or be so familiar with life that it gets categorized and nailed down. And so everything's kind of free floating. So I just have bags and bags of letters from kids who share their hearts with me in the most enchanting ways and send me gifts and stop me on the street or wherever I go to do a book signing. But I'll back up. Came out of childhood and went into theater just passionately as a young adult, as a teenager. Saved my life when I was a teenager because I still wanted to play, just as you get in plays. So I was always performing through high school and I went to the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill to major in theater. And then around my junior year, I wandered into a class of the philosophy of religion, and I was totally captured. And I switched my major to religion at that point. And I began reading as I'd never read before in my life because I'd never been exposed to philosophy at all. And I started keeping notebooks and turning to poets and in a very amateurish way constructing a belief system that was very much my own, and still do that. I've kept hundreds of notebooks on mostly quotes of writers I read and thinkers I've talked to. And from this base, I learned, superficially of the religions of the world. I studied Hinduism and Buddhism and um, Islam. And later, Random House asked me to write a book for children on the religions of the world, not even knowing that piece of my background. They asked me for different reasons, but I threw myself into that. And that led me to a real study of Christianity. But meanwhile, back at the ranch, I did a lot of crazy things when I was young. I finished college, went and lived in a cave in Crete, met a Spaniard, went overland for a year in an old van that only started if you pushed it through Turkey, Lebanon, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, and ended up in Nepal with blood poisoning and malnutrition and in a hospital for 2 weeks. And where I read this book from beginning to end, lying in this Nepalese hospital, The Lord of the Rings, a copy exactly that looked exactly like this, that somebody had given me before I was in the hospital, and came out of there, went back to the States. I was in my early 20s. I went to California. I lived in Monterey. I had a brief marriage that was very crazy. I was still sort of play acting everything, like making it more possible than it really was, the dreams I had. Crawled out of that situation, came back east, was in Washington, D.C. My father, desperate to get me back east, had offered to lend me money to go to a school to become a travel agent since I'd been a traveler, which was so funny at the time. And I got a job I went to this little 6-week school in DC and got a job at the Russian Travel Bureau. And one night I was invited to the theater at the Ford's Theater. A show was coming from New York. And I knew the director from my theater days way back. I hadn't seen any of these folks in years. And it was a musical of Jesse James, the Outlaw. And Jesse walked on stage with a cowboy hat and boots and a guitar. And we're going to have our 50th wedding anniversary in 2 years. So I got to know him and married him. And then we moved up. He moved me up to New York to live with him. And I started waitressing and bartending. We had a little flat in Greenwich Village, a 6th-floor walk up on Bleecker Street for 17 years. No sink in the bathroom. Thought we'd lived there for 2 years. And 17 years later, we got out of there. But Will was an actor, a musician. I was wanting to write. And I would go up to the roof of the building and I started writing stories. I didn't know what I was going to write. And then a friend asked me to help put Scholastic magazine had a contest on something that brought my family closer together. Uh, Children who could enter were between 9 and 11. If you won, you got a whole trip to Disneyland for your family. We had they had thousands and thousands of entries. And this friend asked if I wanted to do a freelance job of reading and judging. And so I knew enough unemployed actors and artists I could passel out the papers and say, give me 5 good ones out of this stack. Well, I ended up not having my friends be as reliable as I wanted. So I read thousands and it changed my life because the subject of something that brought my family closer together in 200 words brought out the most touching responses you could imagine. I'll give you an example. I've always used this as an example. A girl from Appalachia, no punctuation in her entry, no capital letters, no good spelling. My father left us and he came home one day and took me to the zoo and we got closer by the bears. That was all there was to the page. And so I made her a runner up. When I finally took in all my entries for the contest, the guy in charge, he and another woman who was on the board of this situation just said, what has she done? But they got the awards, these kids. And out of that, some child in myself started to talk, and my 12-year-old self. And the writer Grace Paley says, write about what you don't know about what you know. What I knew was who I was at 12 years old. And what I didn't know was what would happen if one of my beloved brothers had gotten severely ill and died. I asked this dreadful question and I wrote a book in 2 months and I sold it the next month. And I really did not even know how to write. And to the credit of the editor at it was Dial Press who bought it, she said, you're going to have to rewrite it. And before you can sign a contract, we need you to make it longer and deeper and so forth. And I went to the library and I didn't get children's books. I got Hemingway's books because I always loved him. And I knew that I could understand what he was doing. And I studied him and I studied books about him. And I began keeping files on words and I taught myself because I hadn't taken writing in college. And I just taught myself through enormous effort to really write this second draft as a better book. And they bought it. And then in the next 3 years, I sold 3 more young adult novels. And then I decided I was going to get really, and they were all pretty dramatic and hard hitting. And that was sort of this was on the heels of the Judy Blume phenomena. And then I had friends by then who were writing these books, and you could talk about divorce and mental illness and anything for this new field of young adult writing. So I was pouring all that out from a contemporary world. Like one day I saw a girl on the beach. We were down in Florida. Will was doing a show. And I saw a little girl on the beach guiding a woman, holding her hand. And the woman was holding her shoes and she was way overdressed for the beach. And it just was like a snapshot in my heart. And I went back and said, who was that girl? And who was that woman? And why were they there? And what was going on with the girl? And I wrote a whole book out of that called Last One Home. And so my 4 books, they didn't sell, they got well reviewed, but what they did for me was give me a foot in the door. So others, editors, publishers were interested in my writing. I have to say in those days, I was very, very lucky. It was before the corporations took over the publishing houses and children's books didn't sell that much. Usually you could count on a library to buy it, but nobody was looking for the bottom line. So if I had good reviews, but I didn't have big sales, they'd try again and try again. Now, I imagine I've heard you go in to sell a book and they want to see your last royalty statements from another house. And if you've not got good royalty statements, you might not ever get another contract. But in those days, they took a lot of risk and they nurtured you.
Mm.
So I was nurtured, and then I started volunteering in a shelter for runaway kids in Times Square called Covenant House. And I spent one summer going there every day. I'd ride my bike there from the village and go in. And I have to admit, I really wanted to research as well as contribute. And I was picking up on the vernacular of the kids and their lives, and I'd have them write stories about their lives, one brief, one page. And they were terrible stories. They were sad and they were honest. And one day I was headed to Covenant House, and I saw someone selling National Geographics on the sidewalk. And I bought up a bunch of them and I took them into the shelter and I passed them out. And I asked the kids to find a picture they loved and write about that. And that was the best day of the writing and the mood and the positive feeling in the classroom. So then I turned away. I decided it wasn't in me to write about a runaway girl. I wasn't going to do that. I turned all the way around to Greek mythology, and I wrote 5 books, published 5 books in the next 2 or 3 years on Greek myths, and then I wrote a book of medieval tellings, and Norse myths, and American tall tales, mermaid tales from around the world. I joined the Jung Library in Midtown, and I'd go there and up to this dusty library no one ever sat in, on the top floor of a brownstone, and I'd comb through these all old books from the 1800s of mythology. I mean, myth, more like fairy tales, and get a lot of inspiration and then pull from that. So like I found a mermaid tale from all around the world. So it was called Mermaid Tales from Around the World. And I published with Scholastic, and they had a beautiful illustrator for my stuff, paintings for the Greeks and the North book and the Mermaid book and the medieval book. And then Random House asked me to do American Tall Tales, which was another entry into a different vernacular. Out of that, I wrote a book called Adeline Falling Star, about a half Lakota daughter of Kit Carson that he really had. And I employed all this 1800s kind of anonymously written almanacs that I'd found at the NYU library, and just dived into the language and pulled out the spirit of it. And that's has a sidebar served me well trying to analyze the current political situation in the US. This amazing bravado, over talk of self-enhancement is just, if you can see it through that lens, it can be really very much in the American spirit. There were these almanacs were called the Davy Crockett almanacs, and of course he
Oh.
was a real man, but the blowhard bragging of, because these guys were cutting through the wilderness, and
Mm.
that kind of American writing, like Mark Twain said, no, Hemingway, I think, said the first American novel was Huck Finn, because it had this wild language of America. And up until about then, we were more concentrated on more of a British appreciation of the classics. And, like Washington compared himself to Cincinnatus. But then you get later in the 1800s and you begin to hear from the backwoodsmen and the pioneers and the people cutting through the nation and facing a lot of terrible hardship. And that's the sort of the world I entered for some time. And I wrote uh, I wrote a book about a girl who was captured by the Lakota, and she was a Quaker in the late 1700s. And I got into those diaries and that world. And then I wrote 3 books about a girl who lived in Lincoln's time and was witness to Gettysburg. So I was getting a lot into American history. I was just pulling everything out of the sky. I found out you could write a picture book by by employing poetry. Because if you read picture books to small children, you can use adult language because you're an adult reading to the child. You get to my later books, The Magic Treehouse, and the children are reading to themselves. So you get very restricted in your language.
Mhm.
But a lot of people don't realize picture books, the good ones are poetry. They just have
Mhm.
a wonderful use of language and the pictures complete the word. But it's, I've been lucky because I had some great artists do about 4 or 5 picture books. Anyway, I was doing everything and I was sort of known in that world of children's books as doing everything. So Random House called and said, how would you like to do a series? And I was just turning 40 and
You wrote
all
all those books before you were 40?
yeah,
Oh my God.
yeah, actually, well, maybe 41 because the first Treehouse came out in 92. But the interesting thing, I was poor as a church mouse. I mean, that's the funny part of the story is that we were still in that apartment on Bleecker Street with no sink in the bathroom. And to be honest, I said to Random House, I would like to do this 4 series books. I have to figure out what I want to do, but they said, these will not be trade books. These will not go into award possibilities. They won't be reviewed. They'll be sold in Walmart and Target, and they'll be in the grocery stores. And but you'll make a little money. And so I thought I'll just do this to make a little money because I said that would be a nice change. And I, but
So
first,
on all the earlier books, you didn't really make very much money.
no, like on those novels, I got advances of $2,000, $4,000, and then I'd take a year to write the book. So it was obvious I needed people don't realize how little an author gets as a royalty,
Mhm.
and it's even less for children's books than it is for adult books. So you're getting a 6% royalty on a $5 book. You're still in quarters, and you may just sell 5,000 books, or it's hard for a royalty to even earn an advance to earn out. You get an advance, and then anyway, it was really hard in those days for me to get past.
Well, I
Um,
guess my what I'm thinking is you must really love what you do.
Oh, I thought it was the biggest privilege on the planet
Yeah,
that I was
yeah.
allowed to do this because it brought everything I had as a strength to bear, and I didn't have to work in an office, and I could make I was so happy. I was mostly afraid I'd be caught by a truant officer and thrown back into some kind of, you know, uniform situation. I just really loved my freedom. And I wrote all over New York City. We had such a little apartment. I wrote in every library I could find. I wrote in so many coffee shops in the village. I even would take a boat back and forth to Staten Island on the ferry and ride on the ferry and just pay the 50 cent, because in those days it was before I had a laptop and I was writing by hand. And then I had a little space called in the writer's room, which was in the village, and you got a desk a few hours a day. That's where I kept a tabletop computer, and one of the first kinds, go in there and type up my notes from my wanderings. Um, it was a very free lifestyle, even though, it had limitations. So,
Well, I really want to hear about the Magic Treehouse series, but before that, could you just tell me? So you've had the experience of writing longhand, and you've also had the experience of writing with a laptop.
yeah,
How does that change your process?
I used to want the fastest route possible from my brain to the page. I used to even think in those terms, how fast can I get it on the page? And laptop really, really, really got me there. It was a miracle when it came along. The same year I started writing Magic Treehouse, my husband bought us each kind of primitive laptops. And also, I was going on the road with him a bit when he was doing plays, and I would take it. I could write again wherever we landed, I could write on the laptop. And I used my first computer was a K Pro. It was 20 pounds, and I would carry it to these cities where he was doing a show and have this 20-pound computer to put in the room and take out, and you had floppy disk. But it was a miracle even at that stage that I could get it down. When I used to type, and realize I'd messed up a few words and have to retype the whole page, I would just weep. It was so belabored, although I'll admit I had to rewrite so often through mistakes and typos that I would make it better every time. But now I rewrite a page 20 times in an hour. I'm just going all the time, going back, going back, going back, going back. It's I don't know if everyone has that technique, but I just go back again and again and again and again. And of course, the laptop makes that really convenient. Anyway, I decided I would do this series thing, and I decided I would do a time travel, and I would involve history and mythology and real life, because I had my brothers in our play. I had all those mythology books behind me and knowledge of those myths. And then I had a good solid interest in history. And so I thought, time travel, but how am I going to get them off the ground? And it has to be for little kids. It has to be like second and third graders. And I'd never written for little kids like that before. So I started working at it. It took a whole year to write the first Magic Treehouse, and so many drafts, but a very kind editorial team that kept throwing it back at me. You've got to make it simpler. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. It was the hardest thing I ever tried. You'd never know to look at it. It seems like just hardly anything's there at all. And got it off the ground, wrote 4 books. And then something happened that had never happened with all those books I'd written. I had never gotten letters. And I started getting bags of letters. They were going to Random House and then being sent down to me. And most of them talked about, they were either parents, teachers, or little kids writing. The kids' letters were phenomenal. And the parents and teachers were saying, these books are helping my child learn to read. And I had never taken an education course in my life. And in my 40s, like I said, early 40s, and I realized this is important. And I thought I was going to make a little money, keep writing my other books, graduate to adult books. I had written a play that was done off Broadway, very much an adult piece. And something happened, and it was a calling. And I realized I was going to keep going with these books. And then I did other books for some time. I did a series on the Odyssey. I did 6 books to take you through the Odyssey for kids. And I did those diaries of those early American girls. And, I kept my hand in it. But then eventually Magic Treehouse took over. And now I'm working on my 67th Magic Treehouse book.
Wow.
And it's 33 years later. And the fun part of it is not just me now. I'm the only one who's ever written the fiction, but my husband, who's very gifted writer and was always involved with me and supporting me, in spirit and adding to the finances and everything, said, you need a series of nonfiction books. You're doing the fantasy, but what about the facts? And, I think it was Chesterton said, the job is not to turn wonder into facts. The job is to turn facts into wonder. So Will took on the job of giving kids the truth about dinosaurs and knights and castles and mummies and pirates and ninjas and all the subjects I was doing. And then he left that after 8 of them and went off to do Magic Treehouse Planetarium show. And now he's done 8 with our best friends, 8 Magic Treehouse musicals. So that's a tangential, whatever that word is, an adjacent team who's doing another project related to Treehouse. And then my older sister, who's a great writer, took over the nonfiction, and she wrote 40 of them. So I'm having a blast because I'm with my husband, my sister, my friends, and we turned down Hollywood again and again and again because every time we started down that road, I realized we'd lose all our control, and we it was working just fine because the books started selling in the millions, and I just wanted to keep it in our kitchen, just keep it with us and not have it be corporatized. And fortunately, my good agent kept the rights for all those peripheral things. So I didn't have to, sign off in anything that I didn't want to do. So teachers, educators have been a big part of my life. I have a whole program called Magic Treehouse Classroom Adventures, where we've given away over 1 million books through teachers who are in Title I schools who just apply to us for classroom copies. And Random House is okay. It's not a competitor to their market because it's schools that are so poor they wouldn't buy the books otherwise, and the kids don't have any books. So we have a whole program where, for free, to thank teachers for all their support over the years, we've given them lesson plans for every book. We've given them curriculum guides and all sorts of fun things. And then we have the plays being done by children for children around the country, and always working on those. So it continues to grow, and I think it doesn't close in on us because we keep all the doors open, and don't have higher authorities in charge. So that's sort of, and I keep learning amazing things. Every place the treehouse goes is something I don't know about before I do my research. And like right now, the book I finished recently was about sea otters in Monterey. Before that, it was about the little wild horses of Mongolia that were brought back in the 90s after going extinct from zoos. They came back. It's a beautiful story. I learned all about the little taki horses and the Mongolian lifestyle. And I make maps. I keep crazy notes of everything I'm studying. Right now, I'm studying the Jurassic cliffs in Lyme Regis, England, where in 1812, a 12-year-old girl uncovered an millions-year-old sea monster. She was a fossil finder. She was living in utter poverty, supporting her mother, who was clinically depressed. Her father had been killed. All her siblings, 8 out of 10, had died. She had no money. I mean, you can't even, Dickens couldn't even tell about this girl. It wouldn't be believable. She's a true person. And I'm writing a new little offshoot of my regular series called Magic Treehouse History Heroes. And she's my first hero, Mary Anning. So it still remains like so interesting. Everything you can tell about. And Random House keeps letting me do it, so I feel very blessed.
So you started out in the beginning talking about the childlikeness of the way that you viewed the world. And it seems like that passion for discovery and learning new things is still part of that childlikeness. So you didn't completely give up on your childlikeness when you decided to kind of, what you said, come back to reality.
Yeah, no, I didn't. By then I knew enough about reality through some of those hard times in my 20s to grow up pretty fast about, making a living, being a normal person. But I think that one thing, I'm going to give a talk at my university in a couple of months. And I've been thinking about this talk because it's sort of to send the graduates out to the world. I think especially in my theater years, I was very narcissistic, and everything was a mirror of myself. And when I entered those courses on world religion, the door opened, and just a tad. But I became interested in things really outside myself. And I realized much later, like that my real learning started when it was self motivated in my 20s.
Mhm.
And in those years, 2 or 3 years where I waitressed and bartended at night, I'd spend the days reading, and my only criteria was that I read things I didn't know anything about. And I started reading about animals, for instance, because I was in the city and so, you know, cut off from nature. I became obsessed with nature through the written word. And to this day, those books I was mentioning that I recently wrote, it's a quartet of saving different endangered species, but I'm obsessed with animals. And I've written so many treehouse books about animals. But that's something I didn't come to until I grew out of that sort of mirror looking stage, that theater engendered, being a young woman in the 70s, late 60s, being told how important it was to be um, attractive and appealing to others, and then obsessing about how to make that happen. And then turning away from that to look at things that had nothing to do with me personally. And that's the piece I think that's kept me going is I think Jordan Peterson said something like, you're not happy when you're thinking about yourself. And I think that's true because when I get lost in a day's work and I totally leave me, I'm so happy. I'm so content. And then it's like reading a great book, or when you lose yourself and you're focused on the other, or a great conversation where you actually don't think about what you're saying and you're just there. Um, it's very hard to teach that, going back to talking to college kids. And I'm going to sneak up on that subject if I can to try to steer people a little away from their phones and their mirror images and their texting and their selfies and their infinite.
Mhm.
Now exploiting the self is just so overwhelmingly possible
Mhm.
that I don't know I would if I would have survived if I was young now.
Yeah, I was just at an estuary meeting and met a young man who's like 21, and just in the last few years he's been learning some of these things that you're talking about being able to see outside himself, and he began exploring John Vervaeke's ideas and Paul Vanderklay and then Jordan Peterson, and then he began exploring faith, and all of that brought him to a place of recognizing that his whole generation is basically so lost in their screens, and
Yeah.
that plus he says his generation is surrounded with this constant barrage of people trying to influence you to say you can have anything you want, you can be anything you want, there are no boundaries, you can have all the sex you want, you can have all the alcohol you want, just do whatever you want. And he said it's such a relief to be someplace where
Yeah.
somebody says there are some boundaries here.
Yes.
you,
Oh, yeah.
you need boundaries to have a fulfilled life. So
Yeah, and order. You need order. And well, in my faith and my philosophy, I keep being drawn to that which talks about synchronicity and through resonance, like there's a higher order, and we don't impose order on chaos. We find order within what is there.
yes, 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 yes.
And I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
that. And I feel like, boy, I wasn't even close to that when I was young. And I thought I was creating everything. And then later, when everything got so disordered, um, I was just grasping at straws. I also find that if you allow yourself, and this I wouldn't want for people I love, but to fail and be miserable and hit bottom, that you might listen to things you never would have paid attention to otherwise.
Mhm.
You might humble yourself and
Yeah.
um, really be open in a way you've never been before. So I'm not afraid for somebody to stumble and fall. Um, I didn't have kids, but I have a slew of nephews I'm very involved with. And I hold my breath at choices they make, but I know the importance of letting them make them. And
Mhm.
I don't know if you found this, but back then in the old days, our parents hardly, I mean, my parents, when I went overseas and I was traveling in those countries, they didn't know where I was. Finally, when I ended up in that hospital, the embassy in Nepal contacted a congressman in North Carolina who contacted my poor parents to tell them that your daughter, I mean, I would send them postcards from different countries. I told them I was traveling with a group of students, but they would never in a million years have thought to jump on a plane and go find me. It was just so much. I mean, they'd come out of World War II and real hardships, and here I was just sashaying around the world with no money and no stability. And but when I prodigal son goes home, I was just totally embraced and totally, no chastising. And I'm so grateful for that. But they were not involved. They never came to my apartment in New York in 17 years. I wouldn't have wanted them in that 6th floor walk up on Bleecker Street. They would never have understood that space. But it was like that back then.
Mhm.
And my friends, all of us, older now, say that pretty much their parents weren't that involved either.
Mhm.
And um, I envy some of them. They have great friendships with their parents, and I feel like I would have avoided some really stupid mistakes. So I'm not saying it's ideal, but if it happens, it happens. If you go
Mhm.
off the rails, I mean, some things would make it really hard to come back, like addiction and serious, trauma. But just the exploration of our world is there are infinite possibilities.
Mhm. Well,
Um,
yeah, and listening to your story, I mean, something I've come to the conclusion about in the last maybe 10 years or so is to kind of just release people's lives, knowing that God has everybody on a journey.
yes,
Your
that's so
journey,
great.
right? Your journey is what's developing you and changing you and shifting your perspectives and opening up places in you that weren't opened up before. And like you said, coming to places where you're able to hear or listen to something that you would never have listened to otherwise. And if we stick our hands in there and short circuit that journey because we want to fix it for them, we might be stealing their future. I mean, look at your
Oh,
future. Your future is such a the future that you had after you had all those experiences is completely revelatory. I mean, if somebody had rushed out to Nepal to rescue you and bring you home and pamper you and
yeah.
whatever, you
Destroyed
may
me
never have
for them.
become who you are.
No, and this is a wonderful little synchronistic thing. So when I was graduating with my religion degree, I wasn't capable of writing a real paper. It wasn't in me to footnote and have. So I had a wonderful professor, and he said that I went to him and I said, could I do a booklet that's a response to the poet Rilke with my watercolors and my own poetry? And he said yes. So I did this booklet. I showed I when I graduated, I shared it with my mother, but she literally could not understand it, didn't want to read it, put it back on my bed without a word. That I mean that's a real split, but it wasn't. I was fine. I understood that. Years and years later, like 30 years later, I looked at that booklet. I was cleaning out my drawers. I hadn't looked at it since I graduated. The last page is a poem of Rilke's. It starts out, whoever you are in the evening, step out of your room where you know everything. Yours is the last, maybe house before the infinite. And then it goes on and on and on. But listen to the very last stanza. I'm reading this, just a few years ago. You'll lift very slowly one black tree and place it against the sky, slender alone, and you have made the world. Magic Treehouse. And I started Treehouse 20 years after I put that poem in my senior thesis as the last page.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is a telling detail, of you go back and you get these little messages and these little slips of information. And then out of that is a constellation of a life. If you can be attuned to that. And this was looking backwards without any, forcing it. And I was just blown away when I saw that. And I thought, I was putting it in motion way before it came into being. But all that detour I took and all those failings and fallings, I was going to eventually end up with something that would direct my life for the rest of my life. And you see these little things in children's letters and children's writing that have intimations of something beyond children. I see it and real funny things, real touching comments about life or themselves or myself, something they've said about me, the author. And I realized too, and I did give a commencement address last spring where I think it's online of that when young adults come up to me now and they get very emotional about Magic Treehouse, I if I can have a talk with them, I'll say, it's not me and it's not those books. I mean, they're fine. It's you who you were when you read them, and you were 7.
Mm-hmm.
And being 7 is magic. And what you need to reclaim is that for yourself, if
Mm-hmm.
you're that emotional about having read those books.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also often the first time they break the code to really get into reading by themselves. And you want them to go on from there and break more codes and more codes. And sadly, after that phase, they often get into the phones and they stop reading. And that sometimes they'll jokingly say, those are the last books I ever read. They go on to short-term experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Don't let them live an alternate life briefly. So,
Well, you just said something that's so fascinating to me when you look at them and you say it's who you were when you were 7.
yeah,
That's the magic in the books.
yeah.
And I'm sure you said you've listened to some YouTube channels kind of in this constellation that we're involved in here. You probably run into this discussion about how the world needs to be reenchanted.
Oh, yeah.
But I think what I'm hearing you saying that I think makes a lot of sense. And this is one of the reasons I really like Jordan Peterson, because Jordan Peterson says we can't go out and change the world, but each one of us can live into our own life, and through our responsibility, through our sense of adventure, through our willingness to confront hard things, to keep moving forward. So it's not so much that the world needs to be reenchanted, but each one of us needs to get that perspective that people used to have when the world was enchanted.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. That's absolutely true. And I think some adults acquire it a little bit when they have children and they're experiencing the love and the innocence of their own children. So that's a great gift. But I also want to add to that thing about looking at the world. I don't think I really learned to see beauty till I was middle-aged. I was
Mm-hmm.
to feel beauty, to feel something when I see beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And it came on me slowly. Took my mother to Italy and we went to the museums and other countries and we went to museums and I came back and I started going to the Met in New York once a week by myself to find beauty, just a little exercise all alone. I had a little routine. I'd walk through Central Park, go to the Met and have a lunch and buy a book and It was a day to treat myself. And now I have a great library of art books. And I can sit there and flip through the pages and get a happy feeling, just a happy feeling. Doesn't go to my brain, it goes right through my body. And it's sensory and it's colorful. And I know beauty when I see it. But
Mhm.
I trained myself a bit.
Mhm.
And and I know beauty when I see it outside. And this is a blessing of the phone. I'm taking little snapshots a lot because I love the idea of kind of rugged beauty, like a broken gate or, the wood pile or so, because I live in a really pretty New England town. But I think that training the eye, training your interests, training your sense of the beauty of artistic creation, um, is something you have to take on, but it is so ultimately, as you age, so fulfilling. And
Mhm.
I can imagine it carrying me through to death, But as long as I can see.
Well, I mean, I had the same experience, and I wonder if it isn't because at the time that we were going through school, there
Yeah.
was no there was no emphasis on learning about the beautiful. I mean, I never, even though I was a music minor, I never had any training on how to listen to or appreciate beautiful music. And um, I never had got anything in my educational experience of learning how to see the beauty in things that I had a sense, I had a heightened sense of what's pretty. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I used to love to go to the art fairs and see all the pretty watercolors and all the pretty pictures. And so I started painting when I was 50 because we had moved into a big house with lots of empty walls. And I wanted some paintings on the walls. And I didn't have enough. I mean, we live in California, so your house is everything. You don't have any money outside your house. So I had no money to buy any pictures or anything. I thought, well, I'll learn to paint. And so I started taking some watercolor classes at a local school. In the evening, they would have adult classes. And it was there that I learned to see
Yeah.
because they're saying, well, no, shadows aren't gray. You have to learn to see the colors in the shadows. And when you're composing a painting, you can't compose it to be exactly the way it is in the photograph because that's going to be so static, and you need to have the dynamics of the beauty and the arrangements. And I started to have to look at the world in a different way. And when that happened, something in my mind started opening up to the beauty of complexity
Mm.
rather than just simplicity. And that
Mm-hmm.
even changed the way that I heard music.
Ooh.
Before
Mm.
that time, I always wanted to just listen to pretty music. After that time, I started hearing, oh, even with discordant music, there are a lot of really beautiful patterns going on. And and I started seeing the beauty in the rust on an old implement, or on like the paint that's scraped off of walls. I was always going around taking pictures of when people were remodeling their houses and they'd tear down a wall. I'd go in and take a picture of the old wall,
I love
stuff
that.
like that, because there's so much beauty in that kind of thing. And even then, when you start painting, you can recapture that sense of it's sort of a sense of maybe there it looks like chaos when you're looking at old worn paint or something. It looks like chaos, and yet there is a kind of an order and a simplicity complexity kind of, I guess, dichotomy there or something. But yeah, I've
I
certainly had that experience of learning to appreciate beauty.
Well, do you feel sometimes um this you'll never get it all? Like you that we have our lives are too short, that how there's so much to take in, and like I haven't fully studied music and I would love to take a good music appreciation course, and have the time to do that. I would love to take a nature, really understand more about flowers and trees. I have a beautiful book called The Symmetry of Flowers. And so I started cutting little flowers and looking at them as almost, geometric puzzles and just thinking this is endless. And I want to mention, I just joined a new Substack. I have so many, but I love them all. And this one is, I think it's called Old Jerusalem. It's with Andrew Clavin and his son Spencer
Oh,
Clavin.
so brilliant. It's
Aren't
so
they
brilliant.
amazing?
They're
Letters?
amazing. If they don't make a book out of that so that we can
Uh,
have, we need to have it between two covers so we can pick it up anytime.
yes,
Because I save every one of those Substacks, but they're up to
yes.
180 now. So,
Oh my God, I just started this
oh
week.
yeah, you go back through the archives. It's the most amazing conversation. It's
Oh,
so brilliant and filled with beauty and I mean,
it's
every
endless.
every time they write to each other, I'm like, oh, the light bulbs are
Yeah,
just going off everywhere.
the
I love that.
aquarium.
The new Jerusalem.
The New
New
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem.
What a
Yeah.
treasure. I'm so excited about it because it immediately makes me want to go out and look at the world.
Yeah. I don't pay for full membership to very many Substacks, but that's one of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's absolutely worth it. And, if it can keep them writing, I am really tempted to buy Spencer Klavin's new book.
Oh, I have it. Light of the Mind, Light of the World.
You have it?
Yes, I
Oh,
have it. And
have you
he
started
even,
reading it yet?
yes, I have. This is it.
I
But
have
I'm
I
not
have
that.
3 dozen books in a stack that I'm in the middle of reading. So
Oh, you
I
would laugh.
really
We
can't.
we probably have all the same books, the new Jordan Peterson book
Yes, yes, I have that
and,
one.
and the new Rod Dreher book,
No, I don't have that. No,
Living in Wonder. And no, my
no, but
book,
I've got several of David Bohm's books stacked up, and I want to reread all of Wolfgang Smith's books, and I've got
oh, I don't even know those names. I have to add them to
oh
my list.
well,
Uh,
I mean that's the problem. Like when you said there's too much,
Too
there's
much.
just too much because the thing I notice, and you're a bit younger than I am, but the thing that I notice is that time just completely escapes me. I'll
Yeah.
think, oh, I have this whole day to get all these things done. And then at night, I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't get anything done. And
No,
it's kind
no.
of terrifying because I have so many books I want to read and people I want to talk to. And
I know I think what we have are good problems, but they're still problems.
oh,
You know that
before I forget, I want to ask you when you wrote your 67 Magic Treehouse books, did you ever write one about Schliemann's discovery of Troy? Heinrich Schliemann's discovery of
no,
Troy.
no.
That would make a great children's book. That
Yes,
was
it
the
would.
first book that I read after I got out of college that lit the fire for me of wanting to learn things on my own. Um,
Ooh,
there
I
was
will
there was this.
definitely. I saw a video of that once, and d did he actually really find it, or
Oh
was it?
yeah, but I
Yeah,
mean
okay,
he was just a regular guy. He wasn't an archaeologist or anything. And so when he insisted that there was a real Troy, and that
yeah.
he could find it based on just reading the Iliad and the Odyssey, um,
Oh,
people were just ridiculing him, and I mean, he really went through it, but he persisted, and eventually they got to the place where they dug that puppy up, and there it was. That was Troy. So,
oh, I will
uh,
definitely look for that because I'm fascinated with the ancient ruins. Um, that sounds wonderful. And thank you for a recommendation. If you ever get any others, send it. I have to say, I get great ideas from others about what to investigate. And from
mhm.
um, a friend mentioned this girl in England who had uncovered the first ichthyosaur, and I just think it's unlimited what you can write about. That's what I try to tell kids. Don't
Mhm.
run out of ideas. Just do a little research. Go start with something you're in like, and I think teaching too, like if a teacher said, I'm going to give each student a subject to become an expert in and tell the others about their subject, however you learn, so
Mhm.
from the most gifted to the not so gifted, they become the knowledge they have the knowledge of butterflies, or they have the knowledge of airplanes, or they have the not, give a child and learn it the way you like to learn.
Mhm.
If it's on video, if it's reading, if it's talking to someone, and then you tell the whole class about your subject. Doesn't that
Mhm.
sound like a good exercise?
Yes. I mean, I don't know why they don't just teach that way. I mean,
I know that they don't. They don't. That I'm aware.
yeah. So one of the books that I read when I was a child that really excited me were the the Clara Barton books. Clara Barton, the nurse.
Oh, I
They were
vaguely
based on a
remember
true
them.
story about this
Yeah.
nurse. And the other nurse, Florence Nightingale.
I have a
Sure.
treehouse on Florence and a treehouse on Clara. They meet Florence. Did you know that before she went to nursing school, she took a trip up the Nile and had her revelation that she should be a nurse, and
No.
against her parents' wishes. And she had mystical experiences with some of the ancient statues up the Nile. I was beautiful information. And then I did Clara Barton in the Civil War, having a field
Mhm.
hospital in
Yeah,
Virginia,
yeah, yeah.
like a nanny helper. But I have had trouble finding other women. I did the two of them. I did Lady Gregory in Ireland, who gathered so many old tales and fairy tales and was a good friend of Yeats's. They have a treehouse about her, and this little girl in England. But I'm always looking for a woman who was we don't know that much about, but had something achieved and not really recognized when they were young.
How
Um,
about that woman that uh, was one of the first, uh, lost her name. Her picture is in the computer museum here in Silicon Valley.
well, was she a
Like
computer?
1700s. She lived in the 1700s. Mathematician, a woman who's a mathematician who had insights into computation.
Oh yeah, I vaguely remember hearing about somebody
I think her
who like,
first name is like Anne or something like that.
yeah. Well, you can't go wrong with Anne in England.
There's also a wonderful classical artist in the 1700s, someplace, a woman that Iphigenia. I can't remember her name either, but she painted she did portraits of all the greats, but she never became like super well known just because she was a woman. So
Yeah, yeah. I
there
mean,
are lots of interesting stories like that.
yeah, I love stories like that. But I lean toward any hero. I don't just try to find one kind or another. And um,
And do they all have to be real people?
no, I have four books that are fantastical that take place of Treehouse, that they step into other worlds, and they're different kinds of heroes. But but I'll tell
The
you,
reason I ask is because Connie Willis's book, The Domesday Book,
yeah, I've heard
it,
of that.
oh, it's a marvelous book.
Yeah,
I
what
read
is?
it. I only read it because it was assigned to my daughter's class when she was like a sophomore, and I was trying to always read the books that were she was assigned so that I would kind of be able to have conversations with her about it. And it's a time travel book, but it's very weird kind of time travel. It's not in a treehouse or anything. They just sort of go into a certain place where there's an opening, and
Yeah,
so all these people live in the future, but then they travel back into the past to explore history.
yeah,
And
that's sort of
that's
Treehouse
there's a
stuff.
whole like a university, the university history class, the students go back in time. So in
Oh,
the Domesday Book, um, one of the gals who's going back in time to study history, she goes back to the time of the plague,
ooh,
and then she gets stuck there. So she ends up having to be there in the plague for like well over a year.
ooh,
And that's the whole book.
wow.
It was the book was being taught in a class. It was an intersectional class in her school between the chemistry um, and the biology and the literary. So this guy was teaching it, and the whole class was called pen not pandemics. What's the other word?
Epidemics, uh,
It
contagion.
not contagion, but it's similar to that.
Yeah,
It's a word meaning what happens when you're caught in disease and tragedy and all that kind of thing. That's what
yeah,
the class was about, and that was one of the books that they had to read
yeah.
to
Well, I'll look for
consider.
that. That sounds very interesting.
Yeah, because I thought that would, to have a magic treehouse go back into a really difficult time like that, but then not be completely defeated by it, because that's what
Yeah,
happens with her. She's not defeated. She
yeah,
knows how to do certain things that she can do even without all the modern amenities, and she
yeah.
jumps right in there and starts helping
Well,
the best of
that's
her
what
ability.
in my Clara Barton book, they help Claire in the hospital and the wounded soldiers.
Mm-hmm,
And she had rules that they learned and they followed. And what happens is they rise to every occasion, like kids also may enjoy these books because it gives them a lot of respect. It does. I have this feeling that at some level we're all kids come up to me and they don't really even see me as an adult sometimes. They just look in my eyes and we're like ageless, both of us. And I think the characters have a bit of that they can handle the worst. I have to be a little careful. Like if it's the play, I wouldn't want to give them nightmares and stuff.
mm-hmm,
But if my characters are doing something to help or
mm-hmm,
be helped by someone who's brave and good,
mm-hmm,
then you can carry it off,
mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm,
that's the challenge. Um, and the four I did of the animals, they meet four groups of people around the world in South Africa, Mongolia, the Galapagos, and Monterey who are giving their lives to helping animals. So they get to witness, hopefully kids too. Oh, this is not just a tragedy. There's something
mm-hmm,
I could be a
mm-hmm.
ranger, I could be a reserve keeper, I could be a aquarium worker. So I love discovering where the positive is in the tragedies and where a child could conceive that they could play a part,
Mm-hmm.
a helpful part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I remember being a kid and having those feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
The other books I loved when I was a child were the Misty of Chincoteague.
oh, that was nice. I love that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love the Little House on the Prairie books.
Mm.
I have about three sets of those books. And if you want to read a good book in the middle of, well, you don't have snowstorms where you are. We just had one. It was 0 degrees here today. And the long winter in the Little House on the Prairie books
Mm-hmm.
is the most powerful book I've ever heard about bad weather and how a family on the plains survived. And you can find those stories in the old stories. They didn't shy away from them. And
Mm-hmm.
and it actually mirrors the blizzard of 1888 that hit the plains. There were 7 blizzards, I think, that winter, and people people tried to leave their work and they never got home because they would get lost in the flatlands,
Mm-hmm.
just trying in the blur of the white snow. And such great courage and bravery of,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I mean, one thing I did appreciate in the inauguration the other day was Trump talking about what people in America had gone through to our ancestors
Mm-hmm.
and the hardships. And I feel that now it's very hard to endure discomfort, or you don't want to go without breakfast one day. You don't want to step out in the rain and get in your cars. So we have so much comfort. I think it's something scary about it, but I'm too
Well,
old
I
to worry.
certainly noticed that in California. I
Yeah.
moved here in 1990, and always before that, I had lived well, just before that, I had lived in Japan for 3 years. But prior to that, I had lived in the Midwest, where
Yeah.
it's brutally cold in the winter.
Yeah.
And I'm a complete wimp now. I don't think I could ever go back there again.
I
But
know.
but I can. clearly remember one winter when that we had a blizzard, and we had gotten snowed in town when the blizzard started. My husband at the time and I and our daughter had gotten snowed in town, but we had a little farm a quarter mile out of town, just a quarter mile. It was this very small town, so quarter mile out of town. There's this little farm with, I think we had 10 acres or something like that. But we had ducks and geese and goats and chickens and I think we still had a cow at that time. Um, and they had to be watered and fed. And we're in town and they're out there. And of course, their water is frozen. We had to get out there, but there was no trucks had gone through or anything. So we had to walk. And the snow was deep. And you start walking through deep snow, you can't walk very fast. And we got halfway there, and it was something like 30 degrees below zero with the wind chill factor.
No.
And
Wow.
all of a sudden you're just like so exhausted you can't go one more step. And I can remember that feeling of I'm just going to sit down. And if you just sit down, you're going to die. And somehow we had to keep going. We had to get there, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, once you get there, you can't get back into town again. So now
Right.
you're in a house with no running water, no heat, and you have to figure out how are we going to get through this until things turn around. And meanwhile,
Yeah.
you've got the axe. You're out there. You're breaking up the water so the animals can.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember those times. I don't think I could. I know the person I am now couldn't do that, but the person that
No.
I was then could do it somehow.
Yeah.
And I think we have somehow raised a whole generation of people who can't even conceive of why would you want to do that?
Well, that's what upsets me is like my adventures in Asia. We lived in the camper. Um we were in an earthquake in the camper. We were attacked one day by Afghanis who ripped out all our things. We had a lot of harsh experiences. And I kept thinking in my positive way, this is real life. This is what it's really, I'm having a real life. and, and it's fed me every day, all these years later, and probably is a big incentive in my creative work. But kids don't even want that now. They don't even want the adventure. And I think we had a thirst for adventure back then. I
Mm-hmm.
know most people did, and they got derailed a lot. But it just had this aura about it that you have to go out. Well, like you said, Jordan writes a lot about this,
Mm-hmm.
mostly uh, telling young men, test yourselves, go out there and do the best you can do. And I know he's had a very positive effect on one of my nephews is now going to be a father. And I think it's because he's taken on this idea, he's at 30, that this is what a man does. He has a
Mm-hmm.
home, he has a wife, he's going to be a father. But he's the only one among his friends right now that
Mm-hmm.
seems to think that's a great adventure. And so we'll see. We'll see. Maybe with some of these new prohibitions about the phone in school and stuff, it'll stop being such a rush to the
Well, I
end.
mean, don't you think that the whole idea of people not being willing to take on the adventure is, I mean, the reason that we had such a passion for adventure was that there wasn't any place else to get adventure except to live it.
Yeah.
Now you can go to these movies where it's just heart-stopping adventure from beginning to end, or play video games where it's heart-stopping adventure from beginning to end. And it uses up all that desire for adventure, gets all
Yeah.
locked up in there, and then you don't need to have an adventure of your own.
Yeah, I think you're right. You can stay comfortable and you don't have to participate with your hands and your feet and your head and your heart. I mean, it is sort of denaturing us in so many ways, that we're losing that I worry about that, of course, that we all do with AI and the super things that are being promised in technology. I think don't lose the body. I never forget after 9/11, I was in New York then, and I read a piece in the Times just a day or two after the horrible event. And it said, people were sending faxes to loved ones, people trapped in buildings, people, I think they could text then, but they were sending out messages. But ultimately, they could not do anything without their bodies to be safe. And that's going to be the bottom line, no matter as long as we're on earth as people. Our
Mm-hmm.
bodies are going to be those boundaries you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And if we get more and more removed from that, we'll be less protected by any ability to respond,
Mm-hmm.
to hardship. So, one thing about a military childhood I wanted to mention, and if you experience this, for me, it was a great way to grow up. It was like we were surrounded by a force field of safety of some kind, like I remember a dream I had as a 7-year-old where we were in Fort Monroe, Virginia, and there was a guard post. It was an island, and you had to go by the guards to get on the island. And I dreamed that some ghosts were trying to sneak past the guards, and the guards wouldn't let them on the island. And
Mm-hmm.
that to me is sort of how I felt on all those army posts that had protection, and our fathers were all protective types, they'd gone through the war, and we, the kids were in the shadow of World War II, and everything was the patches and the names at Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty. The names where we lived was Normandy Heights, and other kids lived in Anzio Acres and Bastogne Gables. And these were all battle sites in World War II, but they became your housing development. So you always had this sense, at least I did for 15 years, um, when my dad retired when I was 15, of being in a bigger system that was looking out for the little ones,
Mm-hmm.
and and every family at that time was intact. I didn't know any divorced parents uh, among the friends I had. So I just feel like I was so blessed to have that, as I was later blessed to have a publishing atmosphere that was nurturing and took chances, didn't demand I make money in order to publish another book, you
Yeah,
know.
that's amazing. That's really amazing. And that you still had the passion to continue all the hard work that it took to put out those books, you know?
I was driven. I have to say, I was driven. And I
Well,
knew
after the popularity of the Magic Treehouse books, did you find that the sales of your previous books increased a little bit? Do people ever
not
come back and
necessarily. A lot of those have gone out of print. If I hadn't done Magic Treehouse, I'd probably, be struggling to make ends meet.
Mhm,
You would think, I would wish, but I didn't want anyone to publish. After I had my fan base at Treehouse, I didn't want those little fans to read those first young adult novels.
mhm.
And because they were pretty hard hitting. And the first one, that little brother dies, once a child wrote me that he'd found that book in the library, and I wrote him immediately back. This is right in the beginning of Treehouse days. And I said, don't read it. Take it back to the library. It's not for you. I, you know, that was my younger self, writing those books. Who wanted to be hard hitting and honest and grown up, and then now I'm totally protective of my readers. I want them to be
Yeah,
Jack.
well, I mean that I love to hear you say that because um I was raising daughters during that era when all the young adult Judy Blume books and all those things were coming out, and um I did what I could to protect my kids from that because I really felt like, and maybe I'm just a weakling myself, but there's so much hardship in the world. Why would you purposely, you
Yeah,
know, subject someone to having to face that hardship so much younger than they're prepared for it, you know? People always
I
say, well, they're going to face it sooner or later. Well, yes, but maybe get some strength and some nourishment before you have to face the hardship, you know?
yeah, yeah, I agree. I totally agree with you. I have changed definitely in that way. I'm much more protective of children. Um, I want them to be happily situated in the world, to think that things are possible. And even the ones who are suffering, from family dramas, which is so many now. You've got a world separate from that, a place you can go in reading that you can escape, but you can also dig in and live a full life.
Mhm.
I think that's true, especially for kids in underprivileged areas, the inner city. One reason for giving Treehouse away so much is to get them reading, A, but B, get them understanding that the world's a bigger place than they know from their viewpoint.
Mhm.
There's a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, I would love to hear you have a conversation with Jordan Peterson. That would be completely lit.
The insane. He'd scare me too much.
Oh no, I think he would just love your story. Um, he has a I've been listening lately to the gospel series.
Yeah.
The other membership that I bought, I hardly ever buy memberships in any, but I bought a membership to DW Plus. Not, I don't listen to anything else on there. I don't like all the political stuff and whatnot, but I got it just so that I could listen to the gospel series and to go back and re-listen to the Exodus series because I listened to it when it was free on YouTube, but I want to be able to go back into it and listen to it again. But those discussions those guys are having around the gospels are just amazing. And
Oh,
it's
I
not
can't
that I
wait.
agree with everything,
Yeah.
but it just opens up so many avenues of thought.
I love the Exodus series. I saw all of those. Um, and now I'm visiting an Orthodox church that's a little beautiful little church in the woods. And it's almost like I dreamed it. I wanted to visit an Orthodox church for a very long time, inspired by Paul Kingsnorth and Peugeot and Martin Shaw. And but I couldn't find one in my whole county. And then I heard about a little church with about 15 members in the wooded area down in Connecticut. So I started going in November, and it's just been like I dreamed it. Like I'm afraid I'm going to go back one Sunday and I'll open a door and it'll be an empty space. Like you made this up. That's how my imagination can
Is
work
there a lady
sometimes.
there named Catherine? Catherine
There is a woman named Catherine
was
there.
an artist that was on my channel a couple of years ago
There's a Juliana who's an artist.
who told me about um, this little tiny church that she goes, little tiny Orthodox church that she goes to that's out in the woods, just like she dreamed it. She talked about it the same way that you did. Uh,
Yeah.
and wow, I wonder if it's the same one because I think she was out on the East Coast someplace.
Yeah, this is in Northwest Connecticut because I'm in the corner with New York, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. Beautiful area in
Mhm,
the Berkshire Hills where I live. And all of them, it's all very rural, but very well kept. No
mhm,
chains, no, few fast foods. It's
mhm,
just a beautiful, protected part of the country. And snow like we have today. And I just feel like this church is mostly people of Eastern European origin, and there
mhm,
are only 15 of them. And but they're just so kind and so warm and welcoming, and it's such beauty in the room and the incense and the candlelight and
mhm,
they sing a cappella, three or four of them. Through the whole service, they sing the liturgy. And it is an enchanted space. But anyway, none of them, what I was getting at was none of them, I afterwards have the refreshments with them, and nobody knew any of these Substacks. They actually didn't seem that interested. But I finally found one young man who follows everybody. And we were just talking to each other like old friends about, oh, you read this and you listen to him and you listen to him. And he's been doing it by himself for a good year or two. So that was really interesting. And I'll continue talking to him. But I've wondered if almost, you know, they're so happy in what they do, there's no reason probably to open the door wider. They're happy. They
yeah,
most of
yeah,
them.
yeah. I mean, I think I think what's happening in this corner is what I see happening is people who follow the corner and then get stabilized and then
Yeah.
start a family, then they drop off because they've got a real life now. They've got a
Yeah.
real adventure, right? And and I've known several young men who have either got married and had children, or they've gone back to school and started working on a master's or doctorate, and they don't really have time for this anymore.
Yeah.
Not that they wouldn't love to still be involved.
Yeah.
They don't have time for it because this is a time sink. It really is.
It is. Well, maybe if they're in trouble, they can go to the well and have a sip or come back to
Yeah.
it. I think that's the important, that they know something exists is what's important.
Has being involved in this world on YouTube, has it diminished your time that you put into your books?
Oh, it's terrible. Yes, totally. It's I gotta stop. I'm an addict. No, it's serious. And I even carry in my car, I'm going to the grocery store and I've got one of the recordings on but I have a wide variety and it feeds me, and
Hmm.
it's like a friendship with people you'll probably not get to personally meet, but you feel, there's my little island of peace
Yeah.
that where things make sense. It just comes down
Yes.
to,
Yes. I
yeah,
remember during COVID, um, I would some days when things were just so tense and difficult and challenging, I would turn on Paul and hear Paul's voice. Okay, everything's okay.
yeah. I got to meet him in New York at the Erasmus lecture, Paul Kingsnorth.
Oh, that Paul. And I was
Yeah.
thinking about Paul Vanderklay.
Oh, I like Paul Vanderklay.
Yeah.
He is
Yeah.
he is
Yeah.
a very reassuring person, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I
Paul
stumble
Kingsworth
on
is
him
not
because
exactly so reassuring. He's more like the world is falling apart.
I well what he was came on after the Erasmus lecture with Paul Kingsnorth,
Hmm.
and he had such a strong reaction to that lecture. Did you see him after that on his channel?
Oh, Paul Vanderklay's
Yeah,
reaction to
response
the
to it was like, oh my God, oh my God.
no, I saw the title of that video. I didn't watch the video. I've
Yeah,
completely run out of time. I've run out of time to watch any of those videos, and I'm still don't have time to read. So I don't know what has happened. Well, I've dealt with some illness issues and injury issues and everything the last 3 or 4 months, and so um, plus I've had family home, and I have one family member who's going to be moving home with us in a month and a half now, and so I have to empty out a couple of rooms, and that means I'm trying to go through all my stuff and throw out all the junk I don't need and reorganizing and
yeah, there is living.
yeah,
That's a real intrusion in our
yes.
lives.
Living is a real intrusion on my YouTube experience.
No, I'm with you 100%, Karen.
Yeah,
It's comical.
yeah, but it is an absolute delight to have an opportunity to meet people that you would never have that opportunity otherwise.
Yeah, this was
Uh,
serendipity.
and I used to have a dozen really close friends that were kind of in the same wheelhouse that I was in, and we would get
Yeah,
together once a month and have lunch and
yeah.
keep in touch with each other. And in the last 5, 6 years, every single one of them has moved away from this area
No,
because it's an expensive area, especially after you retire.
yeah,
And so for me to be able to talk to friends via Zoom is just an incredible privilege. So,
it is. Yeah.
and
Well,
you're
thank you
you're
for
something else again. I mean, meeting you is just like the highlight of my week for sure.
thank you, Karen. You too. Uh, let's stay in touch.
Yeah, I hope we can talk again. If a topic arises in your thought process that you want to have somebody to talk with about it, let me know.
Oh, I
We can get
will.
together again. Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. But it
Thank
was
you.
great hearing your story today. So
Thank you very much.
thanks so much. Have a great
Bye-bye.
week. Bye-bye.